This is a production of Cornell University.
So, hi everyone again. My name is Ashley Miller-Helmholdt. I work with Cornell Garden-Based Learning, and my colleague Ainsley Rothschild is also here, the CDCIPA program assistant. So we are supporting statewide webinars to help you prepare for Seed to Supper in the upcoming 2026 year. And we thought it'd be really helpful to have a webinar on some of the food assistance programs and some of the changes that are happening with the federal budget, as well as SNAP Ed, which we know has impacted a lot of county nutrition education programs. And we work a lot with SNAP Ed and Seed to Supper. For those that are new to Seed to Supper is a beginning budget vegetable gardening program focused on building community and really building confidence in growing your own food on a budget. And so we work with many partner organizations that serve low-income adults, and many folks as well are taking advantage of some of the food assistance programs across the state. So we felt like it was really important to understand the landscape a little bit better because, that impacts who might be interested in our program, but also how we do some of the education, specifically some of the nutrition education at the end of the program. A lot of folks engage SNAP Ed, or have in the past, for their programs. So again, this is a bit of a broad brush overview of some of the food assistance programs and education support staff across the state, and some of the recent changes in federal funding and the federal shutdown as well, and how that's impacted those programs. And again, this will all be shifting a lot in the next few weeks, but it's especially important right now, I think, as we get um, into a little bit of the details around these programs. So thanks, like I said, for sharing in the chat where you're coming from, what your role is with Extension, and then we'll have some time to talk about questions that might come up after this presentation. So first off, there's quite a bit of information here, like I mentioned, and a lot of it is quite dense. So I will be sharing, and again, if you can see my screen, can you see my screen, everybody, correctly? Okay. So I'll be sharing a lot of the details, like I said, in the federal landscape, but I think big picture overview is that food insufficiency, which really speaks to people's ability to access food for their families within the last 7 days. Like if they were having difficulty accessing food in the last 7 days, that level of folks who are having trouble with that has increased at its highest level in the last 5 years. So that's even including the peak of the pandemic in 2020, which I thought was really both interesting and concerning. So 1 in 10 New Yorkers are struggling with access to enough food. And again, that really is higher than the pandemic time. And it's specifically within that group, the group of people that are most impacted is households with children, but also the elderly and those that are disabled are also impacted as well. So every income group has higher food insufficiency rates in 2024 than in 2020, but especially those that are in the lowest incomes are more likely to experience this. So especially for those who earn, they're more likely, lower incomes are more likely to experience this than those that earn 100,000 or more. And then there's also racial disparities that have been consistent, and that 2 times more Black and Hispanic New Yorkers are experiencing food insufficiency in New York State. So this just kind of shows you some of the trends, and a lot of the dip in food insufficiency rates went down during the time when we were getting a lot of extra SNAP benefits for families during kind of the recovery from the pandemic that have now subsided. And this, again, doesn't include any of the kind of upcoming cuts that we're seeing that are coming up with SNAP benefits and WIC benefits that I'll talk about. But just so you know, like the definition of those two, again, has to do with US Census Bureau Household Pulse Survey, and a lot of the data I'm showing is from 2024. So it won't show what's been going on in the last year per se, but it's, again, increasing steadily. And I think it's something we need to just be aware of, understand that the different competing factors like rent, high cost of energy, and also healthcare costs could also be impacting this, and perhaps even more in the near future. So this just shows again how 2020 fared with families with children, and 2024 is a very similar rate. And so we're kind of seeing those same trends. While that was obviously pandemic related, job loss and food insufficiency, what we're seeing now is related to some of the other factors going on. And I think a big one obviously is inflation and the cost of food. This kind of shows the breakdown by ages. And while it does kind of show that the folks 65 plus are in the lowest category, it's something else to note that that we still have 14.3% of folks, of older adults, 60 plus actually, that are in poverty. So those folks are also vulnerable. And again, that's a pretty high rate of um, poverty. And some of those folks don't take advantage of food assistance programs as much as younger populations. This just shows the breakdown again by very large racial categories that the current census kind of tracks. This just shows you that certain folks are feeling the impact of this at a greater rate than specifically, like I said, white and Asian New Yorkers. So getting to get a little bit of the meat of what we're coming here to talk about today. These are some of the food assistance programs we're going to discuss, and I'm just going to give a brief overview of each, but then we're going to go into more detail into the programs and some of the impacts from the federal funding, both the budget that hopefully will pass. I mean, again, there's lots of issues going on right now, but also the federal shutdown and what that's impacting food assistance dollars currently. So supplemental nutrition assistance program, we talk a lot about SNAP. That's primarily a hunger-based program, right? Addressing hunger specifically. And it's for low-income individuals and families. And again, the largest source of assistance in the country. We have about 3 million New Yorkers that take advantage of it. The Women, Infants, and Children program, however, is more of the nutrition-focused program. So it's very much for those that might be at nutritional risk. So the very vulnerable 0 to 5 age group, as well as prenatal women and pregnant women or pregnant people. Those that are breastfeeding or non-breastfeeding postpartum people, and again, infants and children. And so this program, I'll talk a little bit more about later. FNAP, that's the program that is based out of Cooperative Extension primarily. And so the expanded food and nutrition education program really is, again, funded for limited resource youth and families. So a lot of the same, it's kind of like the education arm, I would say, kind of similar to WIC, but maybe a little bit even expanded beyond that, and is only run through a cooperative extension. Whereas SNAP Ed is more of the supplemental nutrition assistance program, education program, and that's serving primarily folks on the SNAP program. And again, it deals with education and obesity prevention. So there's a lot of similarities, but there are different in kind of their focus and the specific groups they work with. And so in SNAP, like I said, there's 3 million New Yorkers. There's about 500,000 people in WIC in New York State, and FNAP serves about 7,500 or so, and it might be a little different now. That's a 2020 number. And SNAP Ed reaches more like 2.2 million. So this just gives you a sense of the folks in these programs that might be impacted by what we're going to talk about. So there's a whole bunch of new changes to SNAP eligibility and also kind of SNAP administration that's going to be happening and impacting budgets in New York State specifically. So with new expanding SNAP work requirements, you have to be working at least 20 hours a week. And of course, this is for able-bodied adults in New York State. And so while some of these were going to be happening later, now these work requirements are actually going to affect November 1st now, which is a big change that's happened recently. And so that puts about 125,000 adults with school-age children and about 221,000 older adults at risk of losing food assistance in New York State right now, if they don't document sufficient work hours. So just to give you an example, with the high cost of childcare, if you had an unmarried couple, one parent's watching children, or perhaps a grandparent watching children, and they're on SNAP benefits to help make ends meet, they would potentially lose their benefits, even though they're working basically full-time, taking care of children. So these are just the kinds of people that are going to be losing benefits, unfortunately, with these changes. And a lot of research shows work requirements are not effective and reduce access to the program. So this is a big deal and could have really big impacts on people in our program. So this also requires New York to cover an estimated 1.8 billion in SNAP costs in fiscal year 2028. So this is the longer term impacts. So there's a longer term kind of shift to the states. Um, so it's going to be difficult for states to absorb these costs, but it also requires the USDA to update their thrifty food plan, which is the basis of SNAP allotments. This one was difficult for me to understand, but from what I understand, it doesn't accurately reflect the cost of food using updated dietary science and purchasing patterns, and also kind of, the challenges right now we have with some of these inflation costs. So it's going to decrease the amount of money people are getting. There's also waivers for SNAP work requirements that are going to be terminated, and that's going to impact New York, right? Potentially putting 300,000 people at risk of losing their benefits. And then other organizations that benefit from SNAP, like food banks, rely heavily on the federal funding and food shipments. And SNAP's also an important revenue source just for lots of retailers around the state that are also going to be impacted. It isn't really reflected here, but I think the big bottom line is it's got a big impact on New Yorkers. A larger number of people could lose access. And again, this could start happening if the federal budget doesn't get passed soon. People will lose access as of November 1st. All 3 million could you lose access as of November 1st. So these are things coming down really coming up really quickly that we'll need to think about. I guess right now, folks do have some SNAP benefits that have carried over till the end of October. So currently, this hasn't impacted people yet. But again, there could be some really immediate impacts in November should this not get passed of the budget. I mean, I think I mentioned this, but some of the bigger changes to the federal budget, a lot of the added costs to the states will take place more, I think, starting in 2027 in January. And again, the amount of the cost going from the federal budget to the states is shifting from what used to be 50% of what was covered by the federal government to about 25%. So that's going to be about 168 million annually coming out of state budgets. These are all important things to think about because of, county and state budgets taking on some of the burdens. How will that impact other things, right, that are able to be covered? And then, of course, we have to have all those people who are going to then verify all those work requirements that are going to be at the county level. So these are just some of the impacts coming to New York State that might not directly impact right now, but will be impacting things in the future. And so that's just important things to know about, because as we work with people who are impacted by these things, understanding them in some detail, I think will make us better prepared to respond. So I know this is another area that lots of extension offices are really impacted by the SNAP Ed cuts, but again, not everybody knows about all of the recent impacts. So I wanted to just highlight some of the things that SNAP Ed does, and then some people that are impacted, and kind of into a little discussion with you all about how that's really impacting local programming, because this is the one that's kind of most closely tied to extension. So in a nutshell, 217,000 people are directly reached through nutrition education across the state by these SNAP educators in your counties, but they also do a lot of other things like policy, systems, and environment initiatives. And again, we can talk a little bit more with Alicia about some of these things too, but those kinds of policy shifts affect things like fruit and vegetable subscription programs and systems change work and gleaning that all provide, again, better access to food. And so the bigger group that's impacted by these programs is about 750,000 people, according to the SNAP Ed organization in New York State. In extension, we have about 140 positions spread throughout the counties, and those positions funding from the federal government was eliminated. However, because of some carryover funds, they were able actually to continue some programming a little longer, and some counties are doing different things. And so individual counties, individual local governments are taking different steps to try to preserve some of this nutrition education, which sometimes is the only nutrition education in the county. And so while I said 4 months of program winding down, that's more of like a general sort of statement from the SNAP Ed office at the state that when I looked up and researched this, but there is some variability by county. And so that's kind of what I want to talk to you all about next, and allow some time for folks to share and maybe ask questions and think about how SNAP Ed is kind of transitioning in your county. And because this is the program we work with probably the closest with Seed to Supper for education, nutrition education, we wanted to hear directly from you. What's your experience on the ground for SNAP Ed educators and how it impacts you? So that was kind of my next question, opening it back up to you all. And again, you can put it in the chat. You can unmute if you feel comfortable. Just wanted to open it up a little bit to find out how is SNAP Ed changing your programming in your local county, and what are some ways you're seeing or hearing different counties are working to either fill that gap or change positions to keep nutrition education going in your county. So take a little breather. I'm gonna drink a little water. I just wanted to also touch on Women, Infants, and Children program. And while we don't like specifically partner necessarily with organizations that serve, we work with a lot of people that have young children. We work with a lot of organizations that serve young children, whether it's pre-K or like childcare organizations, or again, we have partnered with 4-H and other groups that serve younger kids. So just wanted to give a little overview of this program because it's slightly different, but it's also one that's potentially impacted, and its purpose is, like I said before, nutritious foods, nutrition education, really supporting the vulnerable perinatal period, I guess, for women, and also 0 to 5, because we know through the research how much benefit supporting healthy eating, but also all kinds of things really important in this time frame for our development and for children's long-term well-being, as well as for the person, the very vulnerable pregnant individual. So the target audience is that group particularly, but also caregivers of eligible children. So maybe grandparents, or again, fathers, others that are taking care of young children. The program funding for this is also a part of congressional appropriations, a part of the federal budget, but it's not considered mandatory spending. So that's also another place where, again, so you'll see some of the cuts have happened. But it happens through healthcare professionals, and they determine whether or not someone's at nutritional risk, and also again meets the slightly higher, I guess, poverty level requirement to be in the program. So if you're already in SNAP or Medicaid or at the federal poverty level of 185%, that's when you get into the program. But as you can see, there's a ton of research on the benefits of the program showing it's really valid and really helpful for families. And 7 million mothers and young children across the country are impacted by WIC. So this is a huge group of people. And it really does improve birth outcomes, health outcomes, learning, and even supports, just like SNAP, a lot of retail environments too. So there's a lot of health impacts as well as kind of economic impacts of the program. Yeah, and so the funding for this program, just like SNAP, is currently in a bit of a limbo. It puts current benefits at risk after October. So same kind of thing with SNAP. There was a contingency fund that was helping to keep it going through October, but that is really termed, it sounds like, by the end of October. In previous shutdowns, I guess the states have been reimbursed. It sounds like the federal government has not indicated they will do that this time. And so the appointments and benefits will continue, like I said, until the funding really runs out. And in the long term, the benefits are set to be reduced, because Congress has lowered the amount of funding for this program as well in the next budget. And that budget cut is 100 million across the country. So again, that's going to impact all of these really important pieces for providing healthy food for this particularly vulnerable group. And again, we can talk a little bit more about this at the end. I think it would be really good to talk about, again, if you work with WIC, if you work with folks who work with WIC, potentially how we might try to reach those folks. Since, as you saw earlier, families with young children are particularly at a disadvantage around food insufficiency right now. The last program we wanted to touch on, and I think the good news, we have some good news, a little bit of good news coming up, is that FNEP funding, Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program, that's within the federal budget through extension funding, and that has been level funded, from my understanding, from fiscal year 2024 levels. So that is really, that is good news. We do have a lot of these staff that are working around the state, and I can point you all to the website where you can find those contacts that work through Extension if you don't know them. And I don't think they're at every county, and maybe not the same numbers as SNAP-Ed, but there are folks that are working in different counties throughout the state that are working specifically with low-income families, youth, and children, and providing that one-on-one support focused on diet quality, food safety, and physical activity with those participants. And so this serves a group 100% of the poverty level, right? So maybe not quite the same as WIC, but this is a program that's, I think, more under our control, maybe a little bit. And it is funded like the rest of Extension level funded, which is really, that is very good news for that program as well. And there's a lot that New York State is doing in particular to support food security, especially since the pandemic, that is carrying forward and I think is really positive and could help us as a state kind of get through this really difficult time. And so I wanted to highlight a few of those programs because, again, if we can let people in our seed to supper programs and other programs know about these things, it might be helpful information for them. And so I wanted to highlight just a few. And again, we might have a little bit more discussion in detail, but a few of these programs include the Fresh Connect program, which increases purchasing power of SNAP participants and veterans and their families. And so they get $2 for every $5 SNAP spent at farmers markets. So this reminds me of the Double Up Food Bucks program, though I don't know if that's the same thing. That would be my next question for Alicia. I want to make sure I got that right. I used to be a farmers market manager, and Double Up Food Bucks was a big deal because it increases both farmers' income by increasing the amount that SNAP could get spent, at least at the farmers market. It sounds like this program has a similar kind of reach. So we could talk about that later. I would love to talk a little bit more. But this is Ag and Markets, again, supports that program. Also the Farmers Market Nutrition Program, which is specifically for the WIC participants we talked about, and seniors who are also low income. And that's a $25 voucher for low income individuals. So it's a little different, kind of like more of like a specific to those programs support for folks to get more fresh fruits and vegetables at the farmers market. And that one, from what I understand, is more administered by New York State and the Ag and Markets working with WIC, Office of the Aging and Extension. So again, we're all connected. There's a lot of interconnections between these programs. And that's 2 programs. So I wanted to make sure that's clear. It's 2, one for the families with young children, one for the seniors. Okay. Let's see here. So the Food Access Expansion Grant, well, that's a little bit different. It's funding from the state that supports projects like at supermarkets, farm stands, and mobile markets in places where there isn't really good food access currently, is my understanding, again, and can include construction of new stores, purchase of equipment, creation or expansion of mobile markets, which have been a nice way to bring food, fresh food to neighborhoods and communities that don't have a good grocery store, and rehabilitation of existing food stores. So that set of programs I think are all kind of related in some ways to building food access and local food sources too. So those are great. The ones on the right are more for families and ways to decrease costs for families. So again, a very vulnerable group right now. So right now there's no cost universal school meals, breakfast and lunch, which is really, really amazing for making sure kids get what they need during the school day. Expanded child tax credit is more of a tax piece that helps to reduce costs for families that might increase their ability to buy food. So that's something that the state has done, and reducing poverty. And then summer EBT, that's electronic benefits transfer related to SNAP. This gives families a little bit extra funding just in the summer months when they're not in school and don't get the free meals to help make ends meet. And so this is a big contribution by the state to help fill some of these gaps that we've seen, and hopefully will make some of the blows to what's happening around the country maybe slightly less, but there's still, we're gonna have a lot to deal with in the next few years. So I think I just wanted to tie this back to food security and Seed to Supper. We know Seed to Supper is just one program of many. We're just a small part of the puzzle, but we want to be a part of it. And I think the big takeaway I took from a lot of this research is that we want to be connecting with our local SNAP office as all of these things have been changing, and make sure people still try to apply and get benefits if possible, right? And so one other way to stay connected with like the latest things going on is to connect with our FNEP staff. That regionally, I think we can try to connect people to. Not every county has an FNEP staff in their office, but it could be a really helpful partner for understanding nutrition education landscape as it changes. Yeah, I think the other piece too is just letting people know some of these things are going on in New York State that do support food security. Again, there might be opportunities then to make your budget go a little farther at farmers markets or local food sources. Um, One other thing is something I'm learning a lot about because I think it's something we could learn a lot about doing more with the Master Gardener program is gleaning. And while that's not a core piece of what Master Gardeners do, we have a lot of gardens. We have access to a lot of gardens and support for gardens. So gleaning, obviously being trying to donate food from gardens or farms to local food banks. And in different places, this looks a lot different. It's not a simple process, but there's a lot of really wonderful people working in trying to save food from that would just be thrown out. So getting to know your local food banks is really core to Seed to Supper. Not everybody partners with food banks, but knowing where they are and who they are, and maybe again, since they're impacted by food deliveries and food banks are going to be impacted by a lot of these changes too. Are there ways we can donate fresh food from our own gardens and our CCE gardens to local food banks in ways that are really going to help in a time of need? So that's just a few of my thoughts, but I want to hear your thoughts. I really would love to have a bigger discussion. I realize we're only at like around 30 minutes, but I thought we could have like a little bit of a discussion time as a group about what's going on in your location. We've got Alicia here, so thank you again for being here, Alicia and Ainsley, to talk about how this might impact Seed to Supper or other programs, and really get your questions answered. So this is a lot of information. Wanted to make sure we had time to talk. And also, last but not least, there is a little bit of funding opportunities right now that counties can take advantage of. So I wanted to remind people, if they didn't know, we have a Seed to Supper mini grant program. It's small funds to get a Seed to Supper program up and running in counties around the state. And so we have this grant open. We'll send it to you in the follow-up of the RFP. And that's open until November 15th. So please consider applying if you're interested in getting a little extra funds to get your program going. It couldn't support things like food at meetings for Seed to Supper, but also plant starts and other materials you need for growing food, as well as, if you want to bring in someone to do some nutrition education, that could be used towards that. The Towards Sustainability Foundation grant, those are larger grants. I think they're up to like about $11,000 and they're fairly easy for counties to apply for. And they want people who are involved with food systems, managed landscapes, gardens, and green spaces to apply. So if you have a great idea for expanding Seed to Supper or another program this year that impacts food security, please consider it. And if you need help, if you need partners, reach out to us and others on campus that work in this kind of field, because we'd love to see a few grants go in from counties looking at food security, especially food security gardening, since that's what we do. So those are the contacts, but I can also send on that application and a follow-up to this presentation. So I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to let you all talk for a little bit, and maybe I can stop sharing. Like I said, maybe folks want to unmute if you have the ability to put on your photo so we can see who you are and talk a little bit. It would be great to see your faces and just kind of get to know you and what you're kind of interested in learning more about and maybe what you need. So I'll kind of leave it there.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.